everybody. Welcome back. We are going deep today. We're going to be taking a deep dive into something pretty cool. I think the power of positive thinking.
It is powerful stuff.
It is. And we've got, I love it when we have sources that are very focused and targeted. And this one is really cool. This is from a podcast all about using this superpower for language learning.
That's a really great point. I mean, they really do a good job of focusing in on that and speaking to that specific audience.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk a lot about, the mindset, all the kind of the software side of language learning. Yeah. And this is right up that alley.
Absolutely.
So, without further ado, let's jump in. So, I mean, first of all, what is positive thinking? Because it's one of those things that gets thrown around a lot. But what is it really? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I think, when I think about positive thinking, especially in the context of this podcast that we listen to, it's almost like choosing a lens to look through, right? So, you're faced with a challenge, you're learning a new language, you're running into difficult grammar rules. Do you choose to look at that through a lens of, oh, this is too hard, I'll never get this. Why am I even trying? Or do you choose to look at it through the lens of, okay, this is a challenge. I can work with this. I'm going to figure this out. It's going to take some time.
Yeah. It's almost like two sides of the same coin.
Right.
The exact same situation.
Yeah.
But are you focusing on the problem or are you focusing on the solution?
Right.
And I think that's kind of at the heart of what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And it's so easy, especially when you're learning something new, to get bogged down in those negative thoughts, right? Because it's challenging, it's frustrating. And so it's so important to actively choose to look for the positive in those situations. Like, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? What's the next step I can take?
Yeah, exactly. And this podcast does such a good job of sort of breaking it down, for people who maybe aren't familiar with all the ins and outs of positive psychology and all that stuff.
Right.
So I think that's what makes it such a great source. So, okay, so we kind of have a general idea of what positive thinking is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like choosing to focus on the solution rather than the problem, the opportunity rather than the obstacle.
Right.
But why does it matter? Why should we care? Why is this relevant for language learning?
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing about this specific podcast, right?
Yep.
It's not just like a general, positive thinking is good for you.
Right.
It's about how it specifically benefits language learners.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting things that they brought up, there was a study that they mentioned where learners who practiced gratitude journaling, which is a very specific technique for cultivating positive thinking, for just 2 weeks, they felt significantly more confident speaking English.
Really?
Yeah.
Just 2 weeks of writing down things they were grateful for.
Yeah. It's amazing, right? It's like, it seems so simple.
Right.
But it can have a huge impact because when you're focusing on what you're grateful for, what's going well, it shifts your whole perspective.
Yeah.
And that confidence, that belief in yourself, it's essential for language learning.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely noticed in my own life when I'm in a more negative headspace, it's harder to remember words.
Yeah.
To be creative with language.
Yeah.
To think on my feet.
Right.
And I actually had an experience similar to what you were talking about. I was living in Brazil, and I was really trying to get good at Portuguese. And I started doing this thing where every day I would just write down 3 things I was grateful for.
Yeah.
And I actually noticed that my Portuguese got better.
Wow, that's awesome.
So maybe there's something to this.
Yeah.
So, okay, so confidence is a big one, right?
Yep.
What are some of the other things that this podcast talks about in terms of the benefits of positive thinking?
Yeah. So, I mean, they talk about things like lower stress, better sleep.
Right, which are essential when you're learning something new.
Exactly. Because when you're stressed, you can't focus. You can't remember things as well.
Right.
You're sleep deprived. Same thing.
Right, you're not at your best.
Exactly. And then they even talked about things like, they were talking about a stronger immune system.
Wow.
Fewer sick days, so you have more time to study.
That's amazing. So it's like a whole body thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's really incredible when you think about it. It's not just about feeling good. It's about your whole physical and mental well-being and how that can impact your ability to learn.
So, okay. So we've got this powerful tool, right? But the question is, how do we use it?
Yeah, and that's what's great about this podcast is that it doesn't just say, think positive.
Right.
It actually gives you practical techniques and strategies to do that. So one that we already mentioned is gratitude journaling, which is such a powerful, easy thing to do. They suggest just writing down 3 things every day that you're grateful for. And they can be big things or small things like, I had a delicious cup of coffee this morning, or I finally understood that grammar rule I've been struggling with,
Yeah.
or I had a conversation where I could actually understand what someone was saying.
Right. And I think it's important to make it relevant to your language learning journey.
Absolutely. And it could be, I spent 15 minutes studying today, you know?
Yeah.
Anything that's moving you forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's about celebrating the small wins,
Right.
because those small wins add up to big victories.
Exactly. And it's so easy to get caught up in the I'm not there yet mentality, right?
Mhm.
That we forget to acknowledge all the progress that we're making along the way.
Totally. And I think that really ties in with this idea of reframing negative thoughts, which is another technique that they talk about.
Yes. And that one is so, I think, crucial for language learners because we're constantly putting ourselves out there.
Right. You're going to make mistakes.
We're going to make mistakes. We're going to feel embarrassed sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to just spiral into that negativity, like, oh, I'm so stupid, I'll never get this. So reframing is about consciously choosing to look at that situation differently. So instead of saying, I'm so embarrassed I made a mistake, you can say, okay, I made a mistake, but what can I learn from it? How can I do better next time?
Right. It's like turning that mistake into a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's such a powerful shift in perspective because, anyone who's ever learned a language knows you're going to make mistakes.
So many mistakes.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
So why not turn it into a positive?
Right. And it takes practice, right? It's not like you just wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm a positive thinker now.
Right.
It's something that you have to consciously work on and cultivate over time. And that's what
Sure.
they emphasize in the podcast, too.
And I think that kind of leads us into this next piece, which is this idea of visualization, which is something I've always been fascinated by.
It's so powerful.
So powerful. So what is it? And how can we use it for language learning?
Yeah. So visualization is more than just daydreaming, right? It's about creating a vivid mental image of yourself succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
So in the context of language learning, it might be picturing yourself confidently ordering food in a restaurant in your target language or giving a presentation in your target language and really feeling those feelings of confidence, of excitement, of accomplishment. And they emphasize in the podcast that the key is to combine that imagery with a strong belief in yourself. So it's not just seeing it, it's feeling it and believing that it's possible.
Yeah. I've heard it said that the brain doesn't know the difference between something you vividly imagine and something that's actually happening.
Right.
So I think there's something to that. Like if you can really create that experience in your mind,
Yeah,
it can have a real impact on your confidence, on your motivation.
absolutely. And I think it also helps to kind of rewire those neural pathways in your brain, right? Because if you're constantly visualizing yourself succeeding, it's almost like you're practicing,
Yeah.
even though you're not actually in that situation.
Right.
So it prepares you for when you are in that situation.
And I think that really ties into this idea that positive thinking is a skill, right? It's not something you're either born with or you're not.
Absolutely.
It's something that you can cultivate and strengthen over time.
And like any skill, it takes practice and effort and consistency. And they talked about in the podcast, even if you're not feeling positive one day, that's okay. Like just keep practicing those techniques, keep coming back to that positive mindset.
Yeah, it's just like you would with any skill, right? If you miss a day of practice, you don't give up.
Exactly.
You get back on track.
Exactly.
So we've talked a lot about our internal world,
Right.
right? Our thoughts, our feelings. But what about our external environment?
Yeah, that was a really interesting point that they made in the podcast. They talk about the importance of surrounding yourself with positivity. So that might be positive people who support your language learning journey.
Right.
Inspiring media, whether that's books or podcasts or movies in your target language, even creating a dedicated study space that makes you feel focused and motivated. Because all of that contributes to a mindset that supports your growth.
Right. It's like you're setting the stage for success.
Exactly. You're creating an environment where it's easier to think positively, to stay motivated, to keep learning.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point because it's easy to overlook the impact that our surroundings can have on us.
Right.
But, if you're constantly bombarded with negativity,
Yeah.
it's going to be harder to stay positive.
Seep in, right.
It's going to seep in.
Yeah.
So we talk about a lot of great things.
Yes.
The benefits of positive thinking, techniques we can use, the importance of our environment.
Mhm.
But let's get real for a minute. Like, life is not always sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
You're going to have setbacks.
Absolutely.
You have challenges.
You're going to have days where you feel like giving up.
Right. So how does positive thinking fit into that?
Well, that's what I appreciate about this podcast is that it doesn't shy away from that reality.
Right.
It acknowledges that challenges are inevitable, but it encourages us to view them as opportunities for learning and growth.
Yeah.
So even if you have a conversation in your target language and it doesn't go as well as you hoped, you can still analyze what went wrong, how you can improve next time,
Right.
and use that experience to fuel your progress.
Yeah, because, one of the things I've noticed in my own language learning journey is that the more I focus on learning from my mistakes, the faster I progress.
Yeah.
Because you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
So if you could reframe that and be like, okay, that was a mistake. What did I learn? How can I do better next time?
Right.
You're turning that mistake into a stepping stone
Exactly.
rather than a stumbling block.
And it's about that resilience,
Yeah.
right? It's about being able to bounce back from those setbacks and keep moving forward.
So I think the big takeaway here, and tell me if you agree with this, but the big takeaway for me is that positive thinking isn't some magical ability.
Right.
It's not like you either have it or you don't. It's a skill
It's a skill.
that you can practice and strengthen.
And it's something that anyone can do, right? It's not like you need any special talent or ability.
Exact.
It's about making that conscious choice to focus on the positive, to cultivate that mindset. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, that's such a great point. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into positive thinking, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
Mhm.
And this is something that the podcast touched on, which is this idea of gratitude journaling.
Yeah.
So if you were to start a gratitude journal today, specifically focused on your language learning journey, what would be the first thing you would write down?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Just something to think about.
Yeah.
Because I think, when you can start to focus on the things that you're grateful for in your language learning journey, it can really shift your whole perspective.
Absolutely.
So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the power of positive thinking. And remember, it's a skill. You can learn it, you can practice it, and it can make a world of difference in your language learning journey. Until next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.